Okay, welcome everyone. In this video, we are going to continue our work with the R package ggplot2, and we're going to discuss how we can create density plots in ggplot2. And so a density plot, this is kind of like a more detailed histogram, but we would read it pretty similar to how we read a histogram. And we use density plots like histograms to visually display a numeric variable. And so let's just continue working with the Palmer penguins data frame. And in particular, let's say we're working with the numeric variable bill length. So this is displaying the bill length for the penguins in that data frame. And in the previous video, we created a histogram to display the distribution of those bill lengths. And that's what we're looking at here. And you can see that this histogram is like bimodal. It has a peak over here, and then it has another peak over here. Maybe it's trimodal, and then it has another peak over here. And what's going on in this data is there are a couple of different species. There are actually three different species in this data set. And maybe what we're seeing is that this peak over here might correspond to one of the species. We might have another peak that's corresponding to another species and so on. So what we might be seeing is that we are like intersplaying three different species, three distributions on top of each other in this data frame. So let's take a look at density plots and maybe how a density plot might help us differentiate between these three different species that we're seeing all jumbled together in that plot above. So we've installed some packages in order to work with ggplot2 and the penguins data. So if you're just opening this notebook, and there's a link to this notebook in the description of this video, you'll have wanted to install those packages. So you want to go to runtime, run before. That's going to run all of the code cells prior to this one, and then you'll be caught up with where we're at. It might open some help documentation that you'll want to close those cells. So to create a density plot, the geom for that is density. So you would do this much the same way that we created a histogram. So for a histogram, the way that we created that was we first had penguins was the data set. Our aesthetic mapping was we just mapped the variable bill length to the x-axis, and then we added the histogram geom, and that created this histogram where we got some warnings that we talked about how to fix those earlier. For a density plot, we would just change that to density. And here's the result. So this is more of like a continuous sort of mapping for that histogram. And again, we're getting the same warning about two rows containing non-finite values outside the scale range. And this is because we have two missing values for bill length. And so if we want to remove those missing values, then we can use this option na.rm equals true. And that's going to ignore those missing values when we create the plot. We get the same exact plot. We just don't get that warning message when we create the plot. And there's our density plot. So that is a kind of continuous version of the histogram that we were looking at above. So to create a density plot, it's more or less the same exact code that we use to create a histogram. We just changed the word histogram to density. And that's what's really nice about ggplot2. It's just like, the logic is very much the same. We just changed the name of the geom, and out comes a different geometric object, but the way that we created it, we just layered things in the same exact way. Just to save us the effort of having to use this option NA remove equals true in all of these plots, since we're going to be working with bill length in all of these plots, I'm going to remove the missing values from the data. And so here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the rows that have a bill length or a bill depth, which is not equal to NA. And then run a summary command just to make sure that we, in fact, removed the two missing values. So this first command just did a slicing. It just removed the missing, moved the observations that had missing values. And now I can check to see that those missing values were removed. It didn't remove the missing values for sex, but that's okay. I'm going to leave those values in here because they did have values for bill length. So the fact that they're missing sex isn't going to affect the plots that I'm creating for bill length. So great. Now I've cleaned up the penguin's data, so I'm not going to have to use this command. I'm not going to have to use this option when I create my plots. So now if I were to run this command again, I'm just going to copy this cell. Oh, here it is down here. So now when I run this same command, it's going to generate the same exact plot up here without that error message. So this just saves me the effort of having to type na.rm equals true. Okay, so that's how we create a density plot in ggplot2. Much the same way we create a histogram, we just use the geom density instead of the geom histogram. In the next video, we're going to talk about how we can add some additional aesthetics to the density plot that are going to help us differentiate between the different species. So these are not just going to be like cosmetic changes. These are going to be ways that we can add a color aesthetic that are going to help us see how species are playing a role in the bill length. Okay, thanks everyone.